Now, when it comes to the Ancient Weapon Uranus, which is the one that we have the least information on, we've had the least clues to in the whole story, there are a ton of theories all around about what they are. And while I think a lot of them are honestly just too small in scale, I'm not actually really saying that any of those are necessarily wrong. I'm just saying they're not the Uranus weapon that EAVE is using in this chapter that I'm going to talk about in this video. At the end of the day, I think they're all essentially reality erasing and shaping powers that utilize and encapsulate astrological powers, such as the sun or the moon, basically harnessing those powers to create change on a global scale, whatever form that takes. And what we just saw in the newest chapter, 1060, is just the version that EAVE has control over right now. And it's the current world-shaping instrument, I guess, that is in use in the One Piece world, but it is not the first one that's been in existence or been utilized by the monarch of the world, but it is the one that is currently being used. And just like the amount of Uranus theories that are out there currently, I think there's tons of anuses in the One Piece world. Everyone's got an asshole, and that in this chapter we've just seen one version of the Ancient Weapon Uranus. And I guess this one is probably the most ancient one maybe. But it's not actually this part of the weapon, it's this part, which I'll touch on towards the end of the video. And I know that sounds crazy, so let's just get right into it. My name is Adam Jinrakai, and EAVE has Uranus. And I'm not saying that EAVE's a suppository, but he's got the world by the balls. And before we get into all that stuff, just really quickly, I personally believe that EAVE is a woman, kind of like a wicked witch or a wicked stepmother type trope, like the Wicked Queen or Queen Grimhild from Snow White. And essentially she can kind of use her eyes to look through the magic mirror on the wall and kind of see things throughout the entire world. But I'll do videos on all that stuff. That is not what I think is being shown in this chapter. And whether EAVE is male or female, I don't really think matters at all for the purposes of this video, but I am going to be referring to her with she pronouns and stuff like that. So if that bothers you, you can totally ignore it. I apologize. I'm just so used to it, from my own headcanon at least. And if the Mirror Mirror May Queen Eyes or something anyone wants to really see a video out, please leave a comment down below and let me know that that's something you'd be more interested in sooner, and I can kind of push it up on the docket of videos. But in this video, I'm going to refer to EAVE as a she, and you know, it's just not a big deal. I don't think, you know, either way. There's a very good chance that whatever EAVE is, that she's been body snatched and there's a different soul actually in the body. Anyway, think that inside of that body and that vessel is maybe a Rox he anyway, so it really doesn't matter. But for this video, I'm going to be calling her a she or a queen. But enough about that. Let's look at this moon yo-yo. And, well, actually, it's probably more likely a sun yo-yo, and I'm going to go into why that is to start off this video, and we're all going to feel real stupid collectively, and kind of all bow down once again to Ichiro Oda and his magnificent writing skills. And I've broken this video up into kind of three main parts that are going to be what exactly this version of Uranus is, how exactly and who can use it, and then what's the actual sacred treasure of Mary Joa, because it's not actually this, as unbelievable as that sounds. So with that, my name is Adam Jinrakai, and let's get started on how EAVE has control over the Ancient Weapon Uranus, which is the spear from the sun. But first we're going to start off by looking at exactly what's going on here and what this whole weapon and version of Uranus is, and then I'm going to get into some real juicy, cool stuff that I think is much more interesting about how exactly this weapon functions and what exactly goes into how it's used and who exactly can use it. But first, let's just look at that name of the ancient weapon. So, Uranus. Some pronunciations of it are Uranus. Oro, like the Oro Jackson ship that Gold Roger used to get the Laugh Tale and find the One Piece or whatever. Well, Oro means mouth, which seems extremely prevalent given the other half of this chapter and Luffy's real dream and stuff like that, which I have a video coming out later this week about all of that. So let's just play around with that word for a second. Uranus. Uranus. Backwards is Sun Aru. And if we go with the Uranus pronunciation, it's almost literally sun arrow. So this whole thing kind of being a directed, laser-focused shot of sun energy or star power being utilized to kind of scorch the earth, I think is what is happening here. And I think that's also a major reason why Sabo is going to live through this, because of his flame fruit. Now, that does bring up a much bigger question about how exactly did the flame fruit kind of be snuffed out by the magma fruit, but we'll touch on that in other videos. But I will be touching on another possible way that Sabo survived this later on in the video. I think that the idea that this whole thing is related to the sun and utilizing the sun energy is all kind of connected to the ancient Egyptian myths of the Eye of Ra and how it's kind of highlighted in usually a feminine embodiment that is kind of supposed to inhabit the vengeance and destructive power of the sun. And I think a real big, obvious, visually symbolic clue to that is that there's 12 sound effects here. You know, like there's 12 months in a year when the earth goes around the sun. All this stuff in the story kind of revolving around the sun in some way or that power, and obviously to the dawn itself of the world. I think on the surface a lot of people think it's Luffy, but I have lots of arguments about that you can check out my whole channel. But I think right here is kind of some big proof that EAMU has some sort of power connected to the sun. And when we actually use a little sun magic to look through the page with light to the page behind it, this whole explosion in the back is actually shows that it's kind of blocking the destruction of this Lelucia kingdom by Chopper's hat that he just got from Tama in Wano. And this hat is specifically, like we saw with Oars Jr., specifically designed to protect you from the sun. And Chopper and all this stuff here I think is a big clue to that. And just like a straw hat actually protects our skin from the rays of the sun, I believe that the straw hat in the One Piece universe does actually hide you from the vision of EAMU in some way. And in the One Piece world, in some form, straw may function as the ultimate sunblock in a sense. It shades the wearer of the straw hat from the rays and eye of the sun. Basically like hiding something in the shadows. And this whole panel with Chopper right here, we even see this building in the back, this building block, this block building, I think kind of all being this sunblock clue. Basically a pair of shades from the sun that work to block its view of you if you're wearing the straw hat and if it's chosen you to be its wearer. But in this case, sadly, I think it's a big clue to Chopper maybe eventually playing a role very similar to Oars, but no one in the world, I think, has talked about the truth about what that really is, because I don't think a lot of people know, but I'm not going to talk about that in this video. No disrespect to any fellow theorists out there. I just think it's a very complicated trap that Oda's kind of laid, and everyone in the world's fallen for it.
What did you say? What was that?
Well, I said it with all due respect.
The last thing I expected.
Sometimes you just have to bow to the absurd.
Coming back to the idea that maybe this would be tied to the moon somehow. And I would have said that maybe this was the moon and some red strings attached to it, which there are many Japanese and Asian myths where fate is kind of tied to a ball of string that's inside the moon that kind of reaches out and touches everything and stuff. And in a very kind of real and symbolic way, connects everyone's hearts and the worlds together. And I do think that that's at play, but I think that the key to that is the moon key D Luffy. And that whole part of this is, you know, connected to him, because this whole thing looks like a Kong gun. But I'm going to touch on that in just a second. My first reaction when seeing this was, it kind of looked remarkably similar to, if you kind of colored this in blue, like it would look like a Kamehameha wave, which I do think is actually very valid as a foreshadowing hint. But back to this idea that it looked remarkably similar visually to Luffy's Kong gun and Luffy's elephant gun, and both Luffy and EAMU being tied to this reality erasing force in the One Piece world, I think is very real. And this Kong gun and whatever this is are a huge clue to them being related. And if we just want to take everything at a very surface level, EAMU seems to be in power and maybe the king or queen or protector of the celestial dragons, and from her perspective, anything that would threaten the safety of her people would be something she'd want to erase and snuff out, very much the same way that Luffy tries to protect his Nakama or friends or crew or whatever. I believe that both of those things could be two sides of the same coin, basically. And before we get too lost in the sauce, I want to first point out that this attack by EMU, this reality erasing or shaping power, being connected to the sun, I think is hugely hinted at by the actual empty throne itself and the idea that it looks extremely similar to a falling star or a shooting star, which I think just happened right here. A shooting star fell to Earth and erased part of it. And just obviously as a piece of the sun, that would be a piece of a star. And I think that whoever kind of sits on there may have some power in controlling exactly that power. The ability to basically pick and choose and play battleship with shooting stars. And tying into that maybe being a heralding vision, I think could be in one aspect how Sabo lived too, because maybe seeing the truth about this fallen star chair might grant you immunity powers against, which I think may be one factor of how the rules of this power actually work. Sort of like the rules tied to a stand from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, or the limitations placed on Nen powers in Hunter x Hunter, where the more rules and limitations that are set on the power and more restrictions that must be met to have the power function may make the power super strong. And I think actually that could be hinted at the devil fruits by themselves, the entire idea that by eating one you gain the weakness of not being able to swim in a world primarily based around water. That's a huge weakness and a huge kind of restriction placed on this power, and I think that that could ultimately be one reason why devil fruits get some sort of power in this One Piece world. As the writer Brandon Sanderson always says, it doesn't really matter how cool a superpower is, what's most important about them is their weaknesses. And for this maybe world-breaking power, not knowing being immune to it just from the sheer idea of knowing about it would be kind of a huge restriction that might make it super powerful in some sense, if there was some sort of a weakness trade-off system powering up powers behind the scenes. And now I know the idea of Uranus and having it be tied to the sky is kind of a really prevalent idea in the community. And I don't think that's a wrong idea. I do think that's one version of Uranus. It's just not the one that EMU has control over right now. But even I think that this sun power can kind of be tied into the idea of it being the sky, because what illuminates the sky so that we can see it, that's the sun. So I believe that it all kind of ties together still as being a Uranus clue. It's just, you know, kind of turned on its head and backwards for the sun arrow. Now, male, female, king, queen, Uranus, sun spear, sun arrow, whatever's going on here with EMU, I think we can all agree that somehow EMU is connected with the celestial dragons. And by extension of the world government and the military powers and the marines in the One Piece world, the celestial dragons have a huge hand in literally creating the world and dictating the boundaries and borders that the One Piece world has. Now, of course, the Calm Belt and the Sea Kings also play a role in dictating the borders of the world, but again, I'll talk about that in future videos. But for this one, the idea that Sea Kings and Celestial Dragons, both types of dragon types, have an act in creating the borders and walls of areas and of the entire world basically, is something that's been used historically in the real world, and I believe in the One Piece world maybe literally. And one kind of major hint that I think kind of maybe points to this all maybe being connected to dragon blood in some way, and the celestial dragons in particular, is the idea from many ancient myths that both the sun's core and the earth's core were inhabited by dragons, and dragon fire is what actually gave both sources their heat and fire. And this whole spear fireball thing kind of hurled from a Charizard inside the sun, I think is a very real aspect to maybe this Uranus thing, and as absolutely outrageous as it sounds to be able to control or aim a dragon's fireball from the sun sounds, I actually think there's lots of hints to that kind of in this chapter and historically. The king of this Luluzia kingdom is named Sekai, which means border, barrier, wall, all sorts of stuff like that. And historically, in ancient maps, the dangerous places on the map as well as the edges and border of it were marked by dragons. You know, the old saying, you know, there be dragons and stuff like that. That all comes from kind of being borders of maps. And EMU here kind of creating and shaping a world map here with this dragon fire thing, or this missile from the sun essentially, I do kind of really think might be a huge clue to map making, and the idea that part of that map making use dragons, and this is a very fantastical and magical version of that, but in the One Piece world, map making may be very similar. And instead of marking the edges of the map of a paper map with dragons and other sea monsters and stuff like that, in the One Piece world, dragons and sea monsters might actually shape and mark the borders of the very bounds of reality and existence in the One Piece world itself. But this whole thing kind of essentially creating the borders of the story, I do think is real, and I'll touch on that later on in the video when we talk more about the Sekai King. I do think that in part, this dragon in the sun might decide to only listen to one person, and that one person is Imu. Now, that voice and body can be corrupted and used for other things, which is what we're going to touch on. But all kind of starting with the idea that Imu's body is the key to this whole function. Basically, that Imu's body is the key to this weapon functioning and working properly. And that's actually why Doflamingo wanted to body snatch and switch his soul into Imu's body. Because whatever this power is, it would obey Imu's command, and it would allow Doflamingo to seize control over what has the true power over the One Piece world. Well, actually, the body snatching part of this is kind of a vital aspect that we're going to be talking about, I guess, right now. Which, to start with, we have to go back to what Doflamingo was telling Law about his fruit and why he wanted it. That scene holds a ton of keys for at least half of what's going on here. And like always, we just gotta look at the word clues and then we're gonna feel stupid afterwards. Because Oda's such a great writer that he hides this stuff very obviously in plain sight right at first, and then kind of disguises it to where we just don't even notice what he's talking about, okay? So everything that we are gonna need to know about this Uranus weapon here is told to us on this page, or at least how it functions. Now, what I mean by all of this is I think that the Uranus that's being used in this chapter is essentially using some sort of embodiment of the sun power or an eye power crystal thing and shooting that down to either one, destroy this Lulusia kingdom, or grab it up like a toy grabber machine from Toy Story. But either way, the main thing is that this power is so special that it can only be used by one specific body in the One Piece universe. Only Imu's body is capable of controlling this weapon. And that's why Doflamingo was talking about being able to use that personality switching power, and that's why it was such a valuable aspect of his fruit, of Law's fruit. Now, of course, since Doflamingo does not have eternal life, at this point he's kind of talking about having eternal life or attaining that from the fruit. But what he really is talking about in the first page is this puppet master sun thing. And now let me explain that real quickly, because there's lots of stuff in the series about gravity, and it actually seems like gravity and liberation go hand in hand with Blackbeard's fruits, which is a very weird thing, which I'll touch on in future videos. But this idea that every single thing in our galaxy revolves around the sun. So in essence, you could extend that to saying, hey, every single thing that happens is an influence of the sun, almost like it has invisible strings that kind of pull everything, just based on the fact that we're constantly in its gravitational pull. In a symbolic and very real way, the sun has a hand in everything that happens. In everything that moves, a piece of it could be said to have been touched by the sun, okay? Well, it's kind of like the ultimate puppet master. The ultimate puppeteer is the sun. I like to call it the sun kraken. And I think actually a huge part of that we get a hint at in this chapter with these 16 strings or birthday candles that are connected to this huge erasing attack. But back to this important Doflamingo page. He says that he was the worst kind of fugitive because he was one with an ace up his sleeve. And once the celestial dragons realized they couldn't kill me, they grew quite cooperative. So, one, with this huge power, you would think that Imu might have the capabilities to kill anyone. So why would she not be able to kill Doflamingo? Now, one, he could be immortal. He could have already had this surgery performed on him in the past, even and before this whole the whole stuff with Corazon and everything like that, and that he had already used it through someone else with that once, and he was trying to reclaim it to use it for the personality switching power this time after learning more about the ultimate truth of the world and how it functions. And then 2, I would say that whatever this weapon is, it might for some reason not be effective against anyone with celestial dragon blood or ties in their veins. And what I mean by that is basically this attack might kill everyone on the island except for Sabo because of his celestial dragon blood, and that's something built into this weapon. Basically a weakness built into the Death Star. Now, last chapter we got Darth Vader strangling the Rebel Force leader in the beginning of A New Hope with Blackbeard strangling Boa. And then we even actually got the message to Obi-Wan Kenobi in the last chapter, 2 chapters ago with Kuma. And then this chapter we get the demonstration of power against Alderaan. The Star Wars things are going off the chain. But back to the special circumstances surrounding the weapon Uranus and maybe who it can be used against or whatever. If it's not something tied to that celestial dragon blood, then I do wonder if maybe if you actually just know about the real truth of whatever's going on or actually know Emu's identity, then it will not work against you in some way. Like actually knowing that information, that knowledge is power, that knowledge somehow protects you. And just to add that kind of extra level of the Adam Jinrakai tinfoil crazy, I will touch on more later in this video the idea that knowing about this and maybe knowing Emu's true name and maybe Stelly and Vivi knowing it as well, and those bloodlines and bloodlines connected to people that know the truth about this stuff, if that does factor into this weapon not being effective in killing them. And Stelly knowing this stuff is maybe how Sabo might be able to survive this without actually knowing the truth, but his bloodline does. Same with Vivi. Or maybe there's something underneath all of this stuff where there's some overall relation in the blood and family ties and all that crazy stuff in the past, and that somewhere all these might have all been one family at some point in the One Piece universe, and that family split apart and these are all kind of separate legs of a spider, so to speak, or tentacles of a sun kraken. And I just want to kind of put this out in the universe and manifest it a little bit just in case, but if I had to give this power a fruit designation and say it was all tied to some devil fruit, I'm really wondering if it would be the eavesdropping fruit. Or I guess to get super official about it, it would be called the EAVE no Mi, with different spellings of the word Eve, and all kind of being a overall joke to the Adam and Eve, Eve don't touch the fruit, Eve no fruit type stupid joke. But that part is honestly not super clear, as you can see. But what is super clear is what specific day that Doflamingo is talking about. The day that he's talking about needing that Op power in the past, and if he had had the special personality switching power, he could have been able to make use of Mary Joa's treasure to seize true world power. Now I said the page before started with let's get these executions underway. And then at the bottom of the page, he says that the reason that he's so special and the world government is bending to his will with all of his demands with like the 7 Warlord title and everything like that, he says, it's because I know all about a crucial treasure. Now, the official definition of that is, of the word crucial, is essential or decisive for determining the outcome or future of something, extremely important or vital. And there's a great Mr. Morg video from long ago where he talks about that one possibility of what the Uranus superweapon could be is that it's some sort of ability to gauge someone's threat and how, you know, close they could be to actually overthrowing the king or queen of the world. That would be something, and I actually do think that's part of it. I think Emu was able to do that with her eyesight thing, being able to see through people and kind of always kind of have a bird's eye view or an eavesdropping eye over every situation. But then the other main definition of it is anything cruciform or cross-shaped. And I got a video I'm doing right now about Luffy's real dream, and part of that is actually DNA. And in this thing I'm talking, one definition of cruciform is a cross shape in DNA known as a holiday junction, which is basically what it sounds like, a cross-shaped forming of DNA, and it's 4 different things that kind of join up like a 4-way stop. Now, I do believe that lots of characters might be parts of certain gods or certain old figures in the One Piece world's past that may have been broken apart and recombined spiritually with devil fruits or wills or whatever. But all of those words ultimately derive from the original word crux, which is the Latin word, and it means a wooden frame on which criminals were crucified, especially a cross, a gallows bird, which is one who deserves to be hanged, which is, I guess, a derogatory term, and it also means torture or misery. Now, my friend Elson has got some great stuff about EMU that we're going to be touching on pretty soon in this video, but this idea that crux means torture or misery, for the Church of Latter-day Saints, it is a common held belief that the actual Garden of Eden was actually located in Missouri. Now, that might sound really crazy at first, but let's kind of get really crazier. So, Chi-Rho, spelled Chi-Rho, is a symbol right here that's tied to Jesus Christ. Now, of course, that Chi-Rho is in kairoseki, which is the Japanese word for sea stone, and EMU kind of being this queen of the sea, which is like the queen of pirates, essentially, because maybe in the past the world government used to be pirates and they took over, and now there's different people that are called pirates, and it just keeps switching, like Doflamingo said. But this misery thing is really crazy, because all of this stuff I actually kind of think is referring to Berserk. Do you see Femto in his glasses there? Do you see Femto in Doflamingo's shades right there? Now do you notice that his glasses are actually an inverse of Griffith's torture helmet? The parts of his eyes that were taken out so that Griffith could see in the Berserk manga, here they're covered up, but it's the same shapes there. And I say all of that because I think that Roger kind of got inducted into God Hand. And I don't want to get too much into Berserk spoilers, so I apologize to anyone who hasn't read it there. But the day that Doflamingo is talking about wanting to have had the Op Fruit powers at is the day of Roger's execution. And that day is just nothing at all what we think happened. But on that day, EMU was around. So that would have been one moment where Doflamingo would have been close enough, being near the execution platform, to take that power. Or, conversely, to switch places with Roger, who was then ascended to godhood. Now, I actually believe that all of this stuff is the deepest layer of One Piece that is going on, and the clues and where they all lead to. And in this whole scene thing, I don't actually believe that Doflamingo was talking about switching places with Goldie Roger. I believe that this is all cluing into someone in the One Piece world having done that at the time, but Doflamingo specifically just wanted to switch bodies with EMU to have access to the real sacred treasure of Mary Joa. Now, I know all that sounds super crazy and out of pocket, but I promise you, I have nightmares of proof and a couple major videos tying directly into this Berserk stuff and the eclipse and everything coming in October. I figured that'd be a good month to kind of unleash these nightmares of the One Piece world out onto the general YouTube public. So let's go back to something that's confirmed true in this chapter that I was pretty sure for a while, but this chapter really confirmed it, and it's actually hinted at here, and it's what exactly is this sacred treasure? Because as important as EMU's body is, I do not actually think that that's what Doflamingo is talking about, this sacred treasure thing. The actual sacred treasure of the One Piece world is a full world map. Now the catch is that it's not exactly a map that you use to navigate, but more a drawing map that you use to create and destroy. Constantly rewriting and redrawing and erasing and rebuilding and destroying the world. I think it would probably be easiest to just call it a map to world building, in a sense. I think in a very real, literal sense, EMU's a dungeon master or a game master from Dungeons and Dragons, and she controls and creates the board. Now, I think the pieces to the game are missing, because she doesn't, I know we're told all this stuff about it being erased, but she doesn't actually erase it off the board. She crosses it out. And I've gotten some confirmations from some comments that this looking through the light method was actually known about in the 90s and was kind of more mainstream, and it's been lost to time. So I kind of now think that this is kind of the poneglyphs that Oda's been trying to teach us in some form, and looking through the light at these pages, it lines up literally, equating the position of the country of the map of Lelucia with the kingdom of the country, Sekai, going back to the Sekai where we were just talking about, and then the part that's etched out with the X is him getting, blasted away by the light. Now, when we look through the light, at the other side of the spread, we see the ores Wano hat, the Casa hat, protecting him from the sun. Now, I do think that the straw hat essentially blinds Imu from Luffy's actions, and that she can't actually see him the same way that she can see other people. She has to look through people to see him. But I think for other people that aren't protected by the straw hat or the reef, golden reef, whatever, I think she can use this eye power, because when we look through the page through the clouds, it really looks like an eye and maybe even a dragon's eye there on top of the page where the strings of this attack are falling from. And now I actually think in one way there's a huge chance that the main thing that Imu's trying to do here is get rid of a really disgusting world noble leader, and that's this Sekai King. And with all that he's saying in this chapter and what he's kind of spouting, I believe that she could be kind of self-cleaning the world in a way, and that getting rid of these kings is part of the natural process, and that's what's happening here. But that Sekai word is, and the name of the king of Lelucia, is just such a crazy word. I think that the main thing that Oda's playing with here is its use in the game Go. And I say that because I believe that as the puppet master of the world and all this stuff that Imu is, in Go, Sekai is known as a state of impasse where neither player can benefit from playing in a location. So I kind of think that Imu's keeping the story on track and knowing, no, this island in paradise. Luffy is towards the end of the Grand Line. He is ready to find the One Piece. We're ready to get this story kind of in the final stages. He can't go back to here. We need to wipe this out so that it's not a thing, so that Luffy continues on to the ultimate plan, stays on track. And when we look through these pages, we even see the Sunny in these, it looks like musical lines to me, but that it's essentially still right on track with the puppet strings. And to understand a little bit more about that, I think we're going to have to go into the word Uranus. Now, Ura in many languages means to wish, so I can't help but thinking that that's something to do with Uranus, and either wishing away a place, essentially is what Imu's doing here, wishing away this Lelucia kingdom. And now when we look at the Nus part of the Uranus word, we get this definition of a knot or a tie and bond, a core, a heart, a knot or a knuckle, all that kind of stuff, which just kind of makes me think of the logo. How there's the knot and the rope and all that stuff going from the mouth to the back of the logo. Now, that mouth thing is so weird because the Oro Jackson, Oro means mouth as well. And I think that in part the reason that they want the Straw Hats to stay on course and to keep going and maintain the route that they're on is because one thing that's going on in the story at large, this part of this Uranus and Pluton thing, is a conveyor belt into the mouth of the big bad wolf. You know, just like kind of what happened figuratively and literally with Laboon at the start of the entire Grand Line. It starts that way, and I believe that it has a very huge chance of ending the same way. Or at least that was the same ending that Roger got. But that is for future videos. Another thing that I think ties into all of this stuff, and especially tying into this whole idea of keeping Luffy on the right track, quote unquote, is that Lulu actually means a remarkable person or a very attractive or alluring person. So another actually slang definition of it is a very bad mistake or error. So I think all of that is kind of hinting to like the idea that, oh hey, this was like the exact same thing that Ace had in a way. We're not doing that exact version of this story to end this final saga, where we're not doing Marineford Part 2 in the same way with, you know, the brothers and all that stuff. It might be very similar to, you know, saving the princess from the Death Star, but it won't be exactly the same as the Ace stuff. This time, the story is not going to introduce new elements and continue to build upon itself to have a whole second half. This time, the story and the loose ends and the knots are finally being untied and finished off. Or maybe seared off. And that's actually what's going to end this video, is I talked about before that the pieces to this whole game board were missing. And I think that that's because, for the most part in the One Piece world, everything just keeps getting pushed under the rug and kind of hidden under the surface. And what's underneath that big straw hat in Mary Joa, and the secrets underneath the One Piece world that are contained in that and in Imu and everything and all that stuff in this scene, I believe is actually the sacred treasure that Dofi's referring to. I obviously mentioned earlier a lot of stuff about the straw hat and how it kind of shields you from the sun, but also maybe from Imu's vision. Well, the straw hat seems to exhibit some sort of chosen one type powers, or hides you from the sun. I mean, at the very least, it does shade you from the sun, but I do believe it has some sort of a favor or reality favoring power to it. Shine from the gods, I guess you could say. And we see that constantly with it pretty much dictating that Luffy is the main character, and we see how much he erases and rewrites history and reality and revolutions around the One Piece world. Well, I believe that that same sort of thing maybe happened in the past, and this big hat in Mary Joa is a grave site, first off, and this Imu body, or the person inside Imu, is one of the only people that still come to this place to worship, and it's still sacred to them, as the meaning of sacred is characterized by solemn religious ceremony or religious use. And anything, all this stuff kind of relating to a consecrated or dedicated, devoted base of maybe religion or just some sort of ceremony type thing. Well, I believe that that belief power is all over in the One Piece world, and the belief power still put in this hat and gravesite, I believe, is a huge power source in the One Piece world. And the reason why Imu is so connected to it is because, just like Nami in Arlong Park, she was given the hat by maybe Joy Boy. Whatever. Maybe Joy Boy in the past, maybe someone in the past. And that is what grants her favor and power with the gods over anyone else. And until that is switched or whatever, it doesn't work with anyone else. And I think where things kind of gotten screwed with all this stuff is he gave it to, like Luffy gave it to Nami, the hat. Someone, probably Joy Boy, gave Imu the hat and then lost. And this is, at the top of Mary Joa, is where they died and where they lost. Now, that raises the question, how exactly then did Imu come into this place in power? And I think that that's a bunch of stuff for future videos. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to say it probably most likely relates to some sort of vengeance and terror of Kali and that whole myth. And probably tying into some sort of mutually assured destruction type thing where perhaps Joy Boy and his enemy both kind of killed each other at the same time or killed each other ultimately, and then once the world was kind of reforming, Imu and her people took over. And that kind of became the world government that we know, that maybe we know today. And you might ask how that would work even if Imu was body snatched and everything, and I don't know, it just kind of seems like it might be something where like the body still feels sadness and cries, and even though it's a different person and soul inside Imu's body, no matter what, when they go to this grave site, they can't control it and tears come out, and that like the act of that gravitational force, whatever that is, still holds some sort of power and grip in the One Piece world, tied literally to the body and not the mind. And we see Imu cross out the Lucia Kingdom on the map with a paintbrush looking thing. Now I think it's a makeup brush. Now another name for a makeup brush is actually a kabuki brush, kind of tying into the kabuki plays, and I have talked before about how I don't think Wano's over. I just think we're leaving it for an arc and then we're going to come back and all sorts of stuff, making a golden ratio of One Piece sagas. But I believe that she's essentially covering up a blemish in her mind, using makeup to hide what she doesn't want to be seen, or, basically what makeup does, in a way. And there's lots of crazy stuff about mushrooms. Parvision has some great videos about maybe some secret hidden things in the story about mushrooms. Well, another term for a makeup brush or a kabuki brush is actually a mushroom brush. And something that's kind of really just something we'll have to all accept someday is that Zoro is a fruit or a moss, seaweed moss person, and mushroom derives from French words and German words and Norse words that all kind of mean moss. And I actually think that might extend to Kuina from Zoro's flashback. In order to get him onto the quote-unquote right track that Imu has for this grand story, or Oda has for this grand story, Kuina, the alluring sort of love rival interest, had to die, so Zoro ventured outside it into the world. So I think that this whole idea of kind of directing people's attentions by switching the light source, so to speak, or the attention of their life, so to speak, is what part of Uranus, or how she uses Uranus, works, or at least has for most of the story. But I do ultimately think it's a wish eraser, but it's missing a lot of its parts and can't quite fully erase these wishes, but can redirect them or redraw, rewrite, reroute them, tying back in, of course, to like the puppet master sun kraken tentacles. And now this wish or dream eraser, I think, is extremely important and actually ties into the beginning of this chapter, which was Luffy's big, reveal to his crew about his true dream, which I have a video I'm working on simultaneously right now. I'm not sure which one of these is going to come out first, but I have a whole thing about that whole wish and dream world thing that I think is really, really, really fascinating. You're going to get a kick out of, especially if you like Berserk and Dragon Ball. But with that, my name is Adam Jinrakai. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please comment what you think of all of this, and what if you think that if this isn't Uranus, what this weapon might be, or if this is just Emu's devil fruit or something crazy. Maybe it's the EAVE know me, and this is some sort of an eavesdropping devil fruit. Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And with that, my name is Am Jinrakai, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.